Well, good morning. Hey, my name's Josh. I'm the pastor here at Church on the Drive. If we haven't met yet, I'd love to get to know you at some point after service if you have some time. You're here on a great Sunday, whether this is your first, second time, or millionth time here. We're finishing up our series that we've been in called Good for You, where we've been talking about these things that will grow your faith, that will deepen your spiritual life, that will grow your relationship with God. And so these things are things that are good for you. What we've been walking through over the last few weeks are different practices, different things we think would be helpful for you. These are not checklist items. These are not give yourself a gold star on some little checkerboard somewhere, or you get a jewel in your crown or something like that. That's not what we're talking about here. These are things that are really, truly good for you that will grow your faith. So, for instance, what we talked about the first week was connecting in a group. We want to connect in a group. So what we mean by that is you're going to grow if you connect somewhere in a group with somebody. Not just any group, but a group that's dedicated to following Jesus together. Now, as great as it is to see you here in the pews and in the rows here, those are all wonderful things. And I think you get a lot out of coming and listening to the band play and singing these songs about Jesus and to Jesus. I think those things are very important and they grow our faith also. And listening to the word proclaimed from the stage and thinking about those things and being quiet for a moment, that's all great and something you should do. It's also good for you. But you also want to connect in a group because ultimately when you're trying to grow your faith, when you're trying to learn more of what you believe and why you believe it, circles are better than rows. When you sit around in a circle, you can have dialogue and conversation. Not only that, you learn to depend on those people in that group because you're sharing so much of your life with them. And hopefully, if something goes on in your life where you need to, move, or you are in the hospital, or somebody's sick, or you need somebody to pick up your kids, or something like that, some of the first people you think of, hopefully, are people from that group, that faith community that you're part of there. So we want you to connect in a group. We think it will grow your faith as you watch what God does through that group in your life. Secondly, we talked about serving on a team. That was the second week. Serving on a team. And this is just saying, hey, here's your giftings, here's your passions, here's the things that you have expertise in, stuff you like to do. You're going to go and you're going to serve in that area. Now, I love connecting in a group, but if you really want to get to know people, sometimes the best and most quickest way to do that is to serve on a team. Go serve on a team, and you get there and you're painting a hallway with somebody somewhere. If you go on a mission trip with somebody, and you're going to learn who they are real quick, and you're going to have a bond that maybe would take a long time to forge otherwise. Serving on a team is great. So maybe you say, look, I love just smiling at people and making them feel welcome in an area. Man, a team like the coffee team is perfect for you. If you're really focused in on making sure everybody around is safe and everybody's taken care of, or maybe you just have an eye for that sort of thing. Maybe you've worked to make sure that things are secure in other places in your life. Maybe something like a security team is your sort of thing. Or maybe you really love working with teenagers and you want to pour into a teenager. Well, I tell you what, we got a great student ministry. And we got some place you can serve there too. When you start serving on a team, you grow with those people around you and you see what God can do through your service. It grows your faith. And then last week, we talked about giving a percentage of your income. This isn't because we're money hungry. This is because what we want you to do is learn to trust in God, that God is going to supply all your needs. If you're a follower of Jesus, then everything you own already should belong to God. Every little thing you have, including all of your money. Now, we recognize that we all have responsibilities and bills to pay and things like that. So that's all divvied up out here to pay for our housing and our food and our car and all of that stuff. But we give a percentage of our income as a benchmark we want to always hit so we can be consistent. We give a percentage of it so that we can show God, hey, I'm trusting in you. We can more so we can show ourselves, I'm going to trust God and see what God can do in the lives of other people around me because of what you've given me, God. It's not because of what I'm doing. It's because I'm partnering with you in this thing you've given me to be a steward of. And you know what happens? You know what happens when you see your money going towards paying for a kid's ministry or going to pay for this ministry over here or that thing over there? Your faith starts to grow and you recognize it's not about me. It's about all of us coming together to let God's kingdom come here on earth. So we talked about this, connecting in a group, serving on a team, giving a percentage. These are things that are good for you. And as much as I wish it were otherwise, what I also know is that many of us will totally disregard all of that. Even though I explained it perfectly, of course, right? Many of us will disregard this advice that I'm giving you to grow your faith and to do things that are good for you. Because sometimes many of us, we've learned to believe that we can follow Jesus without having to try. Somehow, we've allowed this malicious lie to sink in that I can be a Jesus follower without doing anything. That all I have to do is intellectually assent to the idea that the creator of the universe had this one and only Son who's always existed, and that this Son was incarnate here on earth, and that he died but was resurrected because he was sinless. And if I can assent to that, at least intellectually, then I'm good, and that's all I have to do. But can I tell you something? Anything you do in life that's worth doing, anything of consequence in this life that's worth doing is going to require some effort. It might even be really difficult, but anything you do in this life that's going to be of consequence is going to require effort. And that includes following Jesus. It includes trying a little bit here. When we don't try, what we end up doing is we waste an opportunity. Have you ever noticed that there's people who are really, really good at some things and they don't even have to try? Like have you ever come across somebody who was just incredibly smart? Right? When it came to all things academics, they didn't even have to try. I used to know this guy in high school, and he would miss so much school because of his home life and also just because he didn't want to be there. He was brilliant. One of the smartest guys I've ever met, just naturally smart. He got concepts really well, more quickly than most people. I remember we took the ASVAB as seniors in high school. It used to be what you'd have to do, at least in our school. Everybody who was a senior took the ASVAB, which is the military SAT, basically. And he maxed it out. Got like a perfect score. The highest score you could get, he got it. This is a guy who didn't even graduate in the top 200 of his class. He's brilliant, but he didn't want to apply himself to anything. I wonder if you've ever known somebody like that. They had all this gifting and all this talent, and they did nothing with it. I've seen it in sports, too. I mean, how many times have you heard about somebody who's an incredible basketball player or football player or volleyball player or softball player, all the talent in the world, but they're not willing to work hard at it? Or maybe there's a musician who's really good at this stuff, and they can just hear the music, and it's easy for them to just jump in, but they never work at it. And what ends up happening is, although they're still kind of smart or they're still kind of athletic or still a pretty good musician, they don't develop this gifting, and they waste an incredible opportunity that was in front of them. One opportunity that we cannot afford to waste is the call to follow Jesus. We cannot afford to waste that call. Early on in his ministry, Jesus didn't have any disciples around. He had to call them eventually, but early on, he didn't have any. In fact, before he really got started, he had to go be baptized. And the one person who was baptizing at the time was his cousin, a guy named John. You maybe have heard him referred to as John the Baptizer or John the Baptist. Basically, what's going on was John was this semi-revolutionary figure that the authorities kind of feared and the people revered. They thought he was the greatest thing ever. He was so good that he was like a day's journey out from the nearest big towns. Out in the middle of the desert, there's a little stream that they called a river, the River Jordan. He's out there baptizing people. I've been in that water. It's ice cold. Like my legs went numb after baptizing 3 people, okay? It was that cold. This guy's standing out there all day baptizing people. People are leaving the city, coming out to him, and he's preaching to them before he baptizes anybody. And his message? Repent. Turn from your wicked ways. You're all sinners. Turn from your wicked ways before it's too late. And they did. Like they did. They listened to what this guy had to say. I think about it as a communicator all the time. Like, how did he get that message across to people? You know, in our modern era, it seems kind of mean to be like, hey, look, you're a sinner, okay? You got a lot of stuff wrong with you. You need to tell God you're sorry, right? But he's saying that, and people did. So many people, in fact, that the rich, the wealthy, the well-to-do, the nobles, they started coming out too, and he recognized them from afar, and he'd say crazy stuff like, hey, you guys are a bunch of snakes. Who told you to come out here? And somehow, this guy is still a rock star out in the middle of the desert. People are still coming out. Well, Jesus shows up one day, and as John is doing his thing, Jesus is walking amongst this crowd. There's a bunch of people there. John looks and he says, there's God's chosen one. There's God's anointed one. People are all looking around to see who he's talking about, but they kind of miss and can't figure out exactly who it is. Some of his disciples catch a glimpse of him, but nobody does anything with that information. Not long after that, John was baptizing again and doing all this preaching and proclaiming and telling people they were sinners and how they needed to repent and turn from their wicked ways. And all of a sudden he stops and he says, behold, the Lamb of God. Talking about Jesus as he's walking by. Well, this time his disciples are ready. Now remember, he's a religious rock star, and in that part of the world, at that time in the world, that was a big deal. If you were part of John's posse, part of his crew, big deal. You were somebody important too. Theoretically, you were going to take over his mantle later. Many people believed that John was going to eventually lead the people of Israel. Although John always said, I'm not that guy. I'm the guy before the guy. I'm the band you didn't know you were going to like, who opens up for the band you come to see. He says, I'm the guy before the guy. Well, his disciples, these people who have been around this movement that John is growing out in the desert, they pick up on what John is trying to say. And so they look and they see Jesus walking, and two of them just start following Jesus to see what he's doing and where he's going and what makes him so special. Well, Jesus, like any of us, kind of notices somebody's following him, and he turns around and he says, what do you want? I love that. What do you want, man? And they say, oh, well, you know, John thinks you're kind of special. And so what are you doing, man? Where are you staying? He says this. Come, he replied, and you will see. Something so simple. And so we want to know more about you. We want to know this. He doesn't give them his mission statement. He doesn't give them his vision statement. He doesn't talk to them about theological concepts. He doesn't break down all sorts of stuff. He looks at him and he gives him this invitation. Come and you will see. That's the call to each and every one of us, by the way. Each and every one of us, come and you will see. In fact, I would tell you this. If you're a person who's kind of on the verge of faith, or you're still thinking about this, or maybe you've walked away for a long time, I would say this to you. In the same way Jesus turned and looked at John's disciples who started following him, who were just curious, and he said, what do you want? You got to ask yourself that question. What is it that you want from Jesus? When you start going down that path and thinking about it, what is it exactly that you're wanting? Because when Jesus looks at you and says, come and you will see, I can promise you it's going to be a little bit different than what you think you want right now in this moment. What you end up seeing will be different than what I think you're going to see. So one of the disciples, his name was Andrew. We don't know the name of the other disciple who came with him. They go with Jesus and they talk with him. It's about 4 p.m. The implication is that they kind of stayed and talked with Jesus all night, hung out where he was all night, had this great conversation. By the morning, Andrew and this other disciple have come to believe that Jesus is the guy, that he is the chosen one, the Messiah. Now, that may not sound too crazy to you at this moment, 2,000 years on the other side of the cross, but at the time, it was almost too good to be true. At the time, they probably didn't even dare to believe it for a few reasons. Number one, They'd been praying and hoping for a Messiah for generations at this point. Andrew's father and his father's father and his father's father's father and so on for hundreds of years had been praying for God to send a Messiah, or which just means an anointed one, a chosen one, who was going to throw off the chains of Roman oppression and reestablish Israel. That's one reason. The other reason was there were many people who had tried to claim to be a Messiah already in their lifetime, and they had all been killed. Now think about Andrew. He's been with John, a proven leader, somebody who knows who he is, somebody who's telling people like it is and baptizing people and doing all the good stuff. But now he's got this Jesus guy. And Jesus seems even better. Jesus seems like he's actually the chosen one. So he makes up in his mind that this is exactly who this is. You want to know the first thing he did? I'll tell you. The first thing Andrew did was to find his brother Simon. Another name for Simon is Peter. And tell him, we have found the Messiah, that is the Christ, which just means anointed one. And he brought him to Jesus. So, once he figures out who Jesus is, the first thing Peter does, or Andrew does, is he goes and he finds his brother Simon. Goes and he finds him. Now, if you've skipped ahead in the story you know that this Simon is another name for Peter. And Peter becomes Jesus' right-hand man. He's one of the leading figures, if not the leading figure in the early church. We found the chosen one. Can you imagine what that would have been like if you went to your brother or you went to your sister and you shook them and you said, we found the Messiah. Imagine what's going on with Peter and Andrew in this moment. Imagine what's happening there. For years you've been hearing about this, and for years you've consistently seen the oppression of Rome, but you keep hearing that you're also God's people, and you keep watching these messiahs come up and then wilt away, and the movement's gone, and people die, and sometimes a lot of people die. But here's Andrew. He runs over. He's so convinced. He runs to his brother and he says, we found the Messiah, man. We found him. He's here. Imagine what goes through Peter in that moment. I mean, he's a fisherman. He owns his own business. He's got a family. But here's his brother, somebody he trusts, somebody he loves, looking at him and saying, we found the one who's going to change everything. Everything is going to change. Because that's the deal about the Messiah. If Jesus is the anointed one, the chosen one, the Messiah they've been waiting for and praying for, if he is, then that changes everything. Not just for Israel, but for the world. And so Andrew looks at Peter and says, we found him. We found him. And then he brings him to Jesus. You know, when we find something or someone that we think is incredible, that we think is great, our first instinct is to share it, to share that thing. I was eating at a restaurant the other day, one of the new restaurants here in College Park. It's called The Castle. It's this Irish restaurant thing, and had the bangers and mash. Just a quick side note, it's good. You should do that. Support local business. Good stuff. The first thing I did when I left, I texted my buddy, you gotta try this place. It's so good. Get the bangers and mash. Why? Well, for the same reason, when you hear a new song on the radio that you really like, or you find a new whatever that you really think is great, or you find that new thing that's going to make your household run more efficiently, you share it with people. Good things, we want to share those things with people. So Andrew runs to one of the people that matters most to him in this world, one of the people he was probably closest to in this world, his brother. And what does he do? He brings him to Jesus. He doesn't just talk about it. He says, no, come with me. Come with me. And ultimately, Jesus gets Peter to follow. And then we see this. The next day, Jesus decided to leave for Galilee. Now, where John was baptizing was further down in the southern portion of Israel. Galilee is up north, around the Sea of Galilee. That's where Jesus is actually from. That's where Nazareth is, where Jesus is from. finding Philip. Now, he just finds Philip as he's walking. He said to him, hey, follow me. Follow me. Because Philip, like Andrew and Peter, was from the town of Bethsaida. So they're going together up to the north. Theoretically, they're all just kind of traveling together in a group because you didn't have cars. It's like walking traffic. Imagine if nobody had cars and we had to go from here to Tampa. There's going to be people besides like me walking to Tampa, so we're going to walk together for safety of numbers. I hear there's bears and coyotes around this place. Same idea. But he sees Philip, and he probably started talking with Philip a little bit. He says, follow me. And Philip says, I'm walking with you, man. No, I mean follow me. Follow me. And Philip does. Philip comes to believe that somewhere along the line that Jesus was who he said he was. That Jesus was this person to be followed. Which is great, right? Because it's not just two brothers now that are thinking this. There's another person. There's this Philip guy that also comes to believe it. Do you know what Philip does with this information? Once he figures out who Jesus is and what Jesus is all about, do you know what he does? His first thing is here. Philip found Nathanael and told him, we have found the one Moses wrote about in the law and about whom the prophets also wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. I found the guy. I found the one. The first thing he does is he goes and he tells somebody else. Now, I think it's implied here he has a pre-existing relationship with this Nathanael character. But here again, we find somebody who makes up their mind about who Jesus is, and the first thing they do is they go and they tell somebody else. They say, you got to get to know him. Here's who he is. Now, the reason I have Nazareth highlighted here is because I want you to understand Nazareth was not an impressive place at all. It was out in the middle of nowhere. In fact, here's what Nathanael says about it. Nazareth, can anything good come from there? Anything? That's like, you're from the middle of Oklahoma? Can anything good come from there? No, it can't. It probably can't. You got to be from Texas to really get that, but you understand what I'm saying. No, man, like you're from where? How can anything impressive, anything good come from there? Let's put it this way, how can a musical virtuoso come from the middle of Oklahoma, population 500? How is that possible? I mean, think about it. In their minds, you had to be impressive for other people to believe that God was impressed with you. So he says, Nazareth? Why would God use anybody from Nazareth? Why would God want to do anything with anybody from Nazareth? That place is podunk. Look at Philip's response here. Come and see. Come and see, said Philip. Come and see. Come see for yourself. I figured it out when I met Jesus. Come and see for yourself. And so he starts to bring Nathanael over to meet this Jesus guy. And as they're walking up, Jesus goes, here's a real man of Israel, a person of integrity, a high-quality person. And Nathanael goes, wait a second, you don't know me. How do you know anything about me? Which makes sense. Like, how do you know anything how can you say I'm a person of integrity? You've never met me before. He's right to be skeptical, by the way. Just like today, there were people back there who would try to use godly stuff and mystical stuff to present themselves as otherworldly in some way. And Nathanael is rightly skeptical and calling this out. So, what do you mean? What do you mean you know me? That's a lot of how our world interacts with us today, isn't it? When they think about religion, when they think about spirituality. We live in a post-Christian society. There's a lot of people who have been hurt by churches, have been hurt by people in churches. There's a lot of people who've seen the ugly side of churches that are toxic, that aren't really following Jesus too well. They've seen quote-unquote Jesus followers who haven't lived up to who Jesus called them to be. They were Jesus followers in name only. They've seen that and they said, we want no part of it. I'm over here. I'm not coming back. So they're rightly skeptical. So when Nathanael says to Jesus, how do you even know who I am? What do you mean? Jesus says, well, I saw you when you were under a fig tree before Philip ever called you. I saw you when you were under this fig tree before Philip even called you. And that causes Nathanael to bow down and worship and say, you are the King of Kings. You are the guy. You're the one. That sometimes God will work that way, by the way. We try to put it out of our minds as if it doesn't exist because it doesn't always happen. But sometimes God will do some miraculous stuff and work in our lives in order to draw people towards God's self. It's not always an intellectual thing. It's not always a moral thing. Sometimes there's miraculous, almost mystical stuff that takes place that brings people to faith. So Nathanael responds. He says, all right, you're the guy. I'm following you. Here's what Jesus says. You believe because I told you I saw you under the fig tree? You will see greater things than that. Yeah, that's pretty cool, I guess. But you're going to see things greater than that. And isn't it funny? One of the next things that happens, in fact, the next story we hear about Jesus is his first miracle at a wedding, turning water into wine. The very first thing, turning water into wine. Can you imagine being Nathanael? You're standing there at that wedding and you're like, oh, I did see greater things than the fig tree. That's amazing. That's incredible. I wonder what else he's going to do. He didn't know. But he was there to follow because Jesus was who he said he was. See, it's only when we start inviting others to follow Jesus with us that we really get a glimpse of all the incredible, cool, amazing, wonderful things that God can do. When you start stepping out just a little bit and trusting God and allowing God to move in spite of or despite you, you'll be amazed what God can start doing. You'll be amazed at how God might move, even in miraculous ways around us. But it won't happen until we start kind of stepping out and doing things like inviting others to follow us. So the bottom line today, the thing I want you to remember is this. Inviting others is good for you. If you'll invite others to follow Jesus, I think what you're going to see is growth in yourself. I think you're going to see growth in them. I think you're going to see growth in the people around you. Because once again, you're trusting that God is providing. You're trusting that God is in control of this stuff. And we're not just talking about inviting people to church, by the way. Although that's part of it. We're talking about you inviting somebody else to come meet this Jesus that you say you like, that you say is amazing, that you say has changed your life. Look, our mission here at Church on the Drive, the thing that kind of we frame everything around is to lead others in a growing relationship with Jesus. So wherever they're at, so maybe they're the most hardcore, non-believing person you've ever met in your life. Maybe that's you. I'm describing you in this moment. If that's you, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're watching. Or maybe they've been following Jesus for 65 years. Wherever you're at, you are in a growing relationship with Jesus, whether you like it or not. And we want to help you get from point A to point B so that by the time you take that first breath in that heavenly city, that you know that there's a maker on the other side who's longed for you, who's loved you, and who's been waiting for you. So this frames everything that we do around here, to lead others in a growing relationship with Jesus. That doesn't mean anybody's perfect, that everybody's got it together. It just means we're growing together. Well, how can somebody grow if I don't invite them in? How can somebody grow as a follower of Jesus, wherever they might be, if I don't invite them in? Can I give you some stats that might help you to make up your mind about this? Let me show you something. Now, this first one is the bad news, all right? 2% of people, of churchgoers, people who attend regularly, will invite others to church. This is just inviting people to church. This isn't like saying, hey, let's have a conversation and I'll convince you about my faith. This is, will you come to church with me? 2% of people who attend church regularly. You want the good news? 82% will go if they're asked. 82? 8 out of 10? I wish I would have had those odds when I was dating, right? 8 out of 10. But only 2% are asking. What if everybody in this room who's a follower of Jesus said, okay, I'm going to invite somebody to go to church with me. I'm going to invite them to come and sit with me. And what if they had this 82% hit rate? What do you think might happen? What kind of life change do you think you might see in the world around you and in the people around you? Because don't you believe that following Jesus isn't just about growing a church and pouring into that? Don't you believe that following Jesus is much deeper and much stronger and much bigger than that? I do. I believe that it's all about God's kingdom coming to earth through his local body. That's what it's about. So what if we all working together started participating in what God was doing so much that we affected the community around us for good, that the community around us, our neighborhood, started looking like God's kingdom? What if that happened? I know it seems outlandish. I know it maybe even seems crazy sometimes to think that it's even possible. But what if? Let's just dream big for a little bit. What if it was possible? What if that could happen? But we'll never know if we don't ask. We'll never know if we don't try. And we'll be wasting an opportunity that God's put in front of us. Now, there are a few reasons for this, I think. Sometimes it's reasons like this. 56% of Christians say their faith is completely private. I do not talk about it with anyone. Ever. If that's you, and chances are that I'm describing somebody in here, if that's you, I would just encourage you. Do you really believe what you say you believe about Jesus? Because if you do, isn't that something you want to share? Isn't that something you want for other people? Has your life been changed by Jesus? I can tell you mine has. It hasn't been some great dramatic thing where like I was totally this way one day and then now I'm totally over here the next day. It wasn't like that for me. It could be for one of you or for somebody you talk to. But I'll tell you this, if it wasn't for Jesus in my life, I honestly believe I'd be in prison right now. I really do. But God. I wonder what your story could be. I can't keep that to myself. I'm committed to this idea that Jesus changes things. Jesus changes communities. Jesus changes families. I'm committed to this idea, and I hope you are too. And why would I ever keep that? Look, if I'm going to text my friend about a new restaurant, if you're going to text your friend about a new song you heard somewhere or some really great household efficiency product somewhere, why wouldn't you tell them about the greatest story you ever told? Oh, they need to hear it. They need it. In fact, let me show you this. 40% of non-Christians say they have never been told how to become a Christian or the benefits of it. They don't even know. We're not telling them. But what if we invited them? What if we invited them into this journey? What if we did? What could happen? I'm obsessed with the possibility of what God could do. I'm obsessed with this possibility of what good could come about if we just invited people to follow Jesus with us. If we said, come with me to church. Come, let's have this conversation at this coffee shop. Come to my community group. Let's do this. Let's talk about it. Look, and if you're thinking about how do I invite people to church, I don't even know how to do that. Let me give you a quick tip. I want you to listen for the word not, okay? Listen for the word not. Things like, I'm not from here. Or, I'm not having a great time in life right now. I'm not prepared for this part of life. When you hear something like that, I just want you to instantly go, hey, you should come to church with me. If nothing else, it gives a space to be quiet, to be still, and to think about things. And you may feel awkward. That's okay. And they may turn you down. That's okay too. I want you to keep in mind what's possible if we participate in what God's doing. Because those Andrews and Phillips and Nathaniels, those disciples, they turned the world upside down. Here's why I think this is so important. This is the number that kind of scared me a little bit when I saw it. Current trends are showing us that by 2070, the religiously unaffiliated persons, so what we often refer to as the nones, will be the majority in America. Now, I'm not here to advocate some kind of weird cultural war or anything like that, take back the land or something like that. No. But that is an indicator of some things. If that happens, it means we've wasted an opportunity on a generation. And I can't let it happen. I can't go down without swinging on that. I want you to join me as I follow Jesus and I invite people to follow Jesus and I invite people to church so that we can lead them in a growing relationship. I want to invite you to do the same thing. Listen, if you're here and you've never invited a soul to church or you've never invited anybody to talk about Jesus, I'm not getting on to you. I'm not yelling at you. This isn't me condemning. This is me challenging you. I want to challenge you to make Jesus the centerpiece of your life, so much so that you can't help but share it with other people. Do me a favor. Would you bow your head and close your eyes where you're at just for a moment? I want to give you a space to reflect. If you're here and you're like, man, I've never invited anybody to church. I've been to church for years. Or maybe you're here and you've been following Jesus for 2 minutes and you haven't invited anybody. I want to challenge you to start immediately. In order to do that, I want you to make Jesus the center of your life. Maybe you've never done that. You've never made Jesus the center, the king of your life. I want to invite you right now in this moment to make that declaration to yourself, make that declaration to God inwardly, that Jesus is now the king of your life. And to let everything else from here on out revolve around that decision. And so God, just like everything else, we lift up our hands to you and we say we love you. And it's all about you. We make this all about you this morning. Help us to focus our eyes on you and on what you're doing. To take our ideas and our minds off of anxieties and fears, preoccupations with other stuff. Lord, help us to put you at the center. In Jesus' name, amen.
Would you stand and worship with us once more?